The playoff races are heating up. The St. Louis Blues are on fire, and more on the John Tortorella firing. We've got all of this and a lot more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. I'm Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. I'm here each and every Friday with Rachel Donner of Locked On Flyers. And happy Friday, Rachel.
Happy Friday, I think.
Yeah, let's start with the mess in Philadelphia right now. John Tortorella let go. And I mean, after his comments earlier this week, I don't think it was a shock to a lot of people. But what happened? What went wrong for John Tortorella and the Flyers?
Yeah, I mean, the guys on the show yesterday talked about it a little bit, but I think, given some of the perspective, hosting Locked On Flyers and being around Torts, I think we've known that something was awry since, I would say, Four Nations. And we talked about it on Locked On Flyers quite a bit, how he just wasn't the same. The attention to detail wasn't there. And he just didn't seem to have any plan of attack. He wasn't making adjustments. And I think in a lot of ways, whether there was a precipitating incident or not, and there may have been related to Cam York, and he was benched, and we'll get into that. But I think that he was kind of taking himself out of the conversation, and it got to a point where it just wasn't useful to have him there anymore. And it wasn't necessarily that he lost the room per se; it's that he took himself out of the room in a lot of ways. And I think that's a key difference there. And that's why the timing was what it was. Like, somebody might say, oh, why don't you just wait till the end of the season? There was only 9 games left. Like, when that's the problem, just rip the Band-Aid off.
Right.
And that's what Danny Briere did. He said in his press conference associated with the decision that he believes that this is the rock bottom moment of the rebuild. And that's a direct quote phrase there, rock bottom. And that this is a new phase of the rebuild. And that, to his credit, he said last season when they overperformed and said, expect the results to be a little weaker next season. Nobody expect them to on the inside, maybe from the outside because of how they performed last year, but nobody on the inside was saying this team was going to do as well or better than they did last season. And sure enough, that's what happened. And I think Briere is prepared for this in a lot of ways.
Why do you think John Tortorella, for lack of a better way to put it, checked himself out or kind of gave up on being involved day to day, minute to minute with this team?
Well, I think that's where the big quote from the Toronto Maple Leafs game comes into play, where he says, I don't want to coach a team like this.
Right.
Like, I don't want to learn to coach a team like this. And that's ultimately, I think, why he kind of checked out, because he's like, this is not what I want to be doing. And I think, that again, with maybe a precipitating incident, it brought everything to a head and made the decision for Danny Briere pretty clear. But I do want to talk about that Cam York benching, because it was a pretty wild circumstance given everything around Tortorella getting fired. And this was Brad Shaw's first time behind the bench as the interim head coach. There's always a different kind of energy in a building the first game after a coach gets fired. And the Flyers had 6 defensemen dressed and on the bench, but only 5 of them played. And Cam York sat there the entire game without a stick in his hand and was essentially healthy scratched. And, they weren't commenting on it. Bradshaw said it was a disciplinary issue and just left it at that, which of course leaves things to the rumor mill. And we're getting sort of behind the scenes leaks today saying that there was some sort of incident between him and Tortorella where both of them crossed a line, and maybe that's what led to the timing of the firing and the benching for Cam York. But when you're not specific, and you can't be totally specific in these circumstances, but you got to give a little bit more information, because otherwise the rumor mills are going to spin, right?
Yeah, the world hates a void. Someone's going to fill it. So yeah, I mean that is the issue, and it's interesting that the new coach ends up benching someone on behalf of the departed coach.
I don't know if it's necessarily on behalf of the departed coach. Like, if somebody does something that's inappropriate that warrants an in-team disciplinary action, you just do it. I don't
Right.
know that it was like, trying to white knight or something like that. But
why
I
not
think
make him a scratch and put someone else on the bench?
because there's literally nobody else there, because the Flyers used all of their call-ups already, their post-trade deadline call-ups already, and did not have a spare defenseman.
Wow.
They were only going to make an additional call-up if there was an injury emergency and get an emergency recall. But this is not a circumstance where you're allowed to do that. So as a result, Travis Sanheim played 30 minutes of that game last night against Montreal, which I think, let's talk about Montreal for a second here, because they were woefully unprepared to play a team in a post-coach firing state. And everybody knows the team steps it up a level when you're playing for a new coach behind the bench, or there's like a new energy or a nervousness and a uncertainty, right? You just know you have to step up your game. And Montreal was not prepared for those circumstances. They just did not look like the team that we've seen from them as far as their discipline and I think, they had very good stretches in the game, but they didn't kick into gear until like the mid-late second period. And the Flyers were able to keep that energy going, that adrenaline energy going, and, wind up winning 6-4. I mean, Montreal should not have allowed 6 goals in that game.
Yeah, it's tough. And I think part of it may be that Montreal doesn't have a lot of playoff battling experience over the last few years. So, maybe this is a learning experience for that team. They've now lost 4 in a row. Yeah, they've gotten points in some of those games, but they are clinging to that second wild card spot in the Eastern Conference by 1 point right now.
Right. And I will say Matvei Michkov now has the most rookie goals in the league at the moment. So that was a nice, side effect of that game. He had a really great game and felt like he was playing freer than I've seen anyone. But yeah, I do think Montreal has put themselves in a more difficult position than they should be in, given what they are capable of. And it just seems like nobody in this second wild card race. I mean, Ottawa's doing their thing, right?
Right.
And they've created a little bit of distance. So they seem locked into that first wild card spot. But who wants this second wild card spot? Really?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like anybody does. In fact, none of the teams that are battling for that spot. I mean, Montreal has lost 4 in a row. The Islanders have lost 3 in a row. The Rangers are 3-6-1 in their last 10. Columbus 2-7-1 in their last 10. Detroit is 3-7. They've lost 2 straight. Boston's dropped out after losing 7 in a row. This really is someone's going to win by default.
Yeah, and it's crazy that the team in the bottom half of the Eastern Conference that currently has the best record is the Buffalo Sabres.
No
like in
pressure.
their last 10.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's nobody is stepping forward. Someone's going to win because they're the last person to take a step back. So they'll be at the front of the line. I mean, that's what it's going to be like. Someone's going to go on like a 2 or 3 game winning streak, and that's maybe going to be enough to get that second wild card if it's at the right time.
Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, that means going up against the Washington Capitals, but I think, some of these teams will take it for the playoff experience.
For the playoff experience and from the owner's standpoint, from at least 2 home games of playoff revenue. So, yeah, I guess so. But I don't see how any of these teams really gives the Capitals much of a fight.
Yeah, I think that's the thing here is that whoever this team is has to go into that playoff round with some momentum. And right now, none of these teams seem to be creating any of it.
Yeah, and we'll see if that changes. I mean, there's still about 10, 11 games left for most of these teams, but inconsistency is the only consistent thing about all these teams fighting for the second wild card spot. I know the Islanders can be included in that category. We have got more to get to on today's show. One team that is definitely not slumping right now, the St. Louis Blues. We'll talk about that. Plus, some old veterans having a nice milestone resurgence and a touching moment between 2 respectful rivals. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, tools, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on, and the FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. That's FanDuel.com. So, we talked about nobody seems to want to pull away in that wild card race in the East. Well, in the West, one team has really caught fire, and that is the St. Louis Blues. What has been the difference for the St. Louis Blues in the last 10 games or so?
I think they're playing as a team. They are kind of playing with house money in a lot of ways because the expectations were not there, at least from the outside. Maybe they have internal expectations, that have been guiding them this whole season. But I would say one of the big factors, at least in this recent run, is Dylan Holloway. He scored twice in the game against the Predators. That was their 8th win in a row. And he has just been on fire recently. And you look at his last 5 games where he's got 4 goals and 4 assists, which is not too shabby, right?
Not too shabby at all. And, he is right now second on the team in goals scored behind Jordan Kyrou, who has 31. And yet, that they only have 2 players right now with 20 or more goals, but they have balanced scoring. And then we all know when Jordan Binnington is hot, he's capable of carrying this team for a little ride. And he has played well lately as well.
He has, and I think that is a huge factor there. It's like, which Binnington are we getting? And this season, we seem to be getting the good Binnington, and I'm sure 4 Nations helped him tremendously as well. And I think the Blues benefited from his experience there and kind of kicked his game up a notch a little bit too.
Yeah, and in the last 4 games, they've given up 2 goals in one of them and 1 goal in the other 3. So they are just not giving up a lot of goals, and that definitely makes an impact. And, you look at Binnington, the numbers themselves don't jump out at you as far as his season stats, a 900 save percentage, a 2.73 goals against average. But again, he may not be the most consistent goalie, but when he's on, he's as good as anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other interesting things is the trade deadline and their decision not to move some guys. There was a lot of noise around Braden Shen at the trade deadline, and the Blues were like, no, we're not selling. Like, we have confidence in our team, and we're going to make a run of it. And like, that decision, I think, has really, really paid off.
It has. And, there's always so much pressure at the trade deadline for general managers to make a big move and to shake things up and bring in that big piece. And yet sometimes the best moves are the moves you don't make.
Yeah, and one of the other things that they've been able to do a little bit is start to roll in some of their younger players into this group. And Dalibor Dvorsky got a call up there, and so I think like the Blues are trying to be smart about this, and it's really, really paying off.
It is. And, right now they're only 2 points behind Minnesota for that first
Hmm.
wild card spot. Now, Minnesota has a game in hand, but the Wild are dealing with some injuries as well. Is it possible St. Louis passes them?
I don't know. I think like the Wild, well, first off, they won their most recent game,
Yes.
which we'll talk about in the next segment. But I think that the Wild are a team that is going to maybe lose a game here or there, but then all of a sudden get jolted awake by a team coming up and then put together a string of a couple of wins. I think that's kind of how they operate, that they just kind of float above, and they don't necessarily dominate either. That being said, like, I think that the Blues do have the potential here. Their scoring is great, and I think that you look at their schedule for the remainder of the season here. It's going to be tough because they face the Avalanche next, right? That's going to be a huge matchup for them. They have to play the Avalanche again later. They have to play the Jets as part of this. But beyond that, I think there's some possibilities for more wins here. So the Avalanche is going to be a tough game for them next. But next week they play the Red Wings, the Pens, and then the Avalanche again.
Yeah, there are some opportunities to pick up points, and then there are some real challenges as well. How about Calgary and Vancouver? Those are the next two teams on the outside looking in. They both have games in hand, but can they make up the points?
I don't know. I think like for me, this is the matter, at least on the Calgary side, is Wolf gonna steal some games for them? Because I think that's gonna have to happen in order for them to accomplish this. Because I think that while they are scoring a little bit, like just defensively, they're not quite there. And so it'll just depend on who shows up that day and if Wolf can steal some games for them.
As far as the Canucks go, I mean, here is a team that kind of imploded this year, kind of self-destructed from within, chemistry issues, locker room issues. Would there be a bigger disappointment this year if they missed the playoffs than Vancouver?
I don't know. And that's what's interesting. Kind of going back to the Tortorella conversation, Rick Tocchet is at the top of a lot of people's lists to coach the Flyers next year. And he's like not even out at
Right.
Vancouver
Yet.
at the
Yeah.
moment. Now, speaking of which, though, he and the team have an out in the contract. So it's possible for him to just walk away and not complete the contract with Vancouver after this season. Would he do that to take a Flyers coaching job? Would the Flyers want him to take that coaching job given how things went in Vancouver?
Yeah.
All of those are very good questions, but that adds to the swirl around Vancouver right now and their ability to find consistency. and have, a strong system in place when there's question marks on the coaching side as well.
Any other candidates for that Flyers coaching job? Is Shaw a candidate to take the job full time?
I don't know. I suppose anything's possible, but Danny Briere said that he doesn't even have a list of like qualities he wants in the coach yet, let alone names. So, it's all subterfuge at this point until the mass firings at the end of the season take place.
Yeah, and then we play musical chairs for coaches
Mhm.
in the off season, and yeah, expect that in about a month from now. We have got more to get to on today's show. We've got a milestone for Sidney Crosby and a touching tribute between two veteran future Hall of Famers. We've got all that coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
Now that it's officially spring and we're in daylight savings time, we get all that extra sun, and 5-hour energy has your back to keep it going. You have more time for fun, but sometimes you need a little extra boost to power through. And whether you're staying up late watching hockey games or squeezing in a workout after your job, or just trying to keep up with your busy day, 5-hour energy gives you that quick, refreshing pick me up whenever you need it. With those longer days, I love getting outside for a hike or a long walk. Tropical Burst is my go-to flavor for that quick boost. So head to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from, including watermelon, blue raspberry, and peach mango. You can even build your own 12-pack or 24-pack delivered right to your door. Need one now? You can grab a 5-hour energy shot at your local grocery store or convenience store. They are everywhere. So stock up today and stay energized.
So a milestone for Sidney Crosby. This is almost like a broken record, it seems like. But Crosby now with a point per game in 20 seasons across his NHL career. That is the most of any player in NHL history, passing Wayne Gretzky, who seems to be in danger of being, losing a few more records before
A
this
single
season.
tear is
Yeah,
dripping down my face for
it's
that
passing
too.
Gretzky time.
Yep.
But I guess what this speaks to is consistent excellence on the part of Sidney Crosby over the course of his career.
Yeah, that's what's so great about it. And I'm a Flyers person, and I say this like I I have grown to respect him more and more over the course of his career simply because of that longevity and that consistency. And I think that, for the most part, the things that bugged me about him early in his career just don't exist anymore. Like, he was kind of a whiner and he got away with stuff and complained to the rest, but he grew up and he matured, and his game matured along with him. And I think that, he's been on some very good Penguins teams, and now he's on some not so good Penguins teams. And yet he has kept up that level of excellence this whole time. And that's what I find impressive about him.
Yeah, he just keeps getting it done, and it is comforting to know he has matured since being
Yes.
19 years old and early on in his
Yes.
career. But yeah, he really has come on and done a really great job. And no matter who is alongside him, he just seems to get the job done and continues to be productive. And 20 years of a point per game, including sometime during the dead puck era,
Yep.
it's pretty darn impressive.
It really is. And I think it has helped to have a little bit of a consistent core on that team for him, as far as having Malkin around all that time. And, I think that, Letang was there for a very long time. And so it's just one of those like legendary teams that's gonna be remembered, and he is gonna be the linchpin of that. And I know we're gonna talk about Alexander Ovechkin, but I feel like Ovi is this flame that's, it's like when you go to like a car race or some big event where they have those flame bursts,
Right.
Ovi is those flame bursts, but like Crosby is the campfire that just keeps getting stoked and is consistent, and the hot coals are there the whole time. And you need both, right?
Mhm.
You need both. But I just like, I think when all is said and done for me, I'm a more of a Crosby appreciator than an Ovechkin at
Yeah,
this point.
I can appreciate that for sure. And, how about you mentioned Ovechkin, a
Yeah.
very nice tribute by Alexander Ovechkin for Marc-Andre Fleury after the Capitals' wild game on Thursday. Talk to me about that because I thought it was just very touching.
Yeah, Marc-Andre Fleury is another, former Penguin who I got to appreciate a lot more once he left the Penguins, and, what he's done for the game and his personality, and, as far as his consistency, it's been up and down, but nobody out there will say that Marc-Andre Fleury isn't an outstanding goaltender. And just, I think what he has brought to the Wild this season has been tremendous, and just him doing this kind of farewell tour, like everywhere he goes, like something happens where people give tribute to him, and it's been well deserved. And just to have Alexander Ovechkin basically call the Caps back out from the tunnel to come out onto the ice to give him a proper handshake and a proper farewell, especially given the Caps Pens rivalry that existed all those many years when Fleury was on the Pens. It was just a really lovely gesture.
It was. And it's like two warriors who just have respect for each other, even though they've opposed each other throughout all these years. And Ovechkin quoted, "It's almost 20 years that we play against each other. Pittsburgh, Vegas, it's been an honor to play against him." And then Fleury responds, "I feel lucky I got to play so many games against him. Maybe not getting scored on so much by him, but it was a good battle. It was good times, fun. That's what hockey's all about." And I think that speaks volumes about two future Hall of Famers with
Yeah.
mutual respect for each other.
Yeah, and like that's the part of hockey sometimes that I know, we talk about the handshake line being the greatest tradition in sports, and sometimes it gets a little overblown, but then you have moments like this and you're like, "Ah, I really love this game. Like it's really cool."
Yeah, I mean, some people criticize hockey culture and sometimes
Mhm.
justifiably so, but this
Yeah.
is one of the things I think that hockey culture should be praised for. And to spontaneously do this, this is not a playoff series. This is not a tradition that, after a game, you do a handshake. This is a part of hockey culture that I think is beautiful and great and needs to be emphasized.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And you know, again, like I'm not the biggest Alexander Ovechkin fan out there, but I must admit I was like tearing up a little bit when I saw that video. I was like, "Oh, that's the right thing to do, Ovi, and you did it." And like it was just really really cool.
It was. It really was. And credit to Alexander Ovechkin for that and for
Absolutely.
Marc-Andre Fleury for the grace and class that he displayed as well. And again, just it's like two people who will fight each other tooth and nail and then, you know, appreciate the battle and the quality of the battle over 2 decades, which is hard to believe as well, at how quickly time passes. Where Ovechkin and Fleury were once the young generation, and now they're kind of toward the end of their respective careers. Well, that is going to do it for us today. Rachel, I know you and Erica El Ayala will be here tomorrow for the Women's Hockey Spotlight, so looking forward to that. I'll be back Monday interviewing 3 of our local hosts from around the network about the biggest stories around the NHL. And here on Locked On NHL, we're here every day, Monday through Saturday, bringing you the biggest stories in the hockey league. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great weekend, everybody, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL Podcast.